help you guys to know, where does all this come from? What does it mean, etc.? What's a saint in this tradition, a saint in ours? Does that make sense? In Greek is holy. Like when we say sanctus, sanctus, holy, 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 okay? So another Old English word is hallow. Hallow, holy, okay? So saint. That's what it actually means in the biblical Greek. Holy, okay? Holy. Now, in the early church, you need to know this. Paul, especially Paul, but sometimes Peter, when he was referring to a particular church or community of Christians, he would call them the saints. So that if you were a part of a church, if you were a baptized Christian, or in his days they weren't called Christians, they were just called believers, then you were a part of the community of saints. Okay? Which is a very different understanding than what some Christians have today, right? It was a way to describe the holy ones. The ones who were different from the rest of the world. The ones who had received baptism. They were the holy, the sanctified, the holy ones, the saints. Most of the time, when there's a reference to it, it's plural. It's plural in the New Testament. And there's not, well, I think I wrote it down. There's like 229 times in the New Testament is that word used. But it's almost always referring to a group of people, not an individual. Did you know that?
I do now.
You do now? Okay. What about the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible? What about Jesus' Bible? Do they have saints in there? Nope. There were no such thing. Some people were called holy people, but they weren't marked out. They were God's covenant people, but the same concept wasn't there. This was a special thing in the church. These were the Jews who got baptized. Okay? The marked out ones, the holy ones. Always plural. And it's in a specific locale. In other words, Paul would refer to that church over there, the saints in that church, the saints in that one. Not necessarily to everybody, but just like those ones over there. Make sense? So you can see out of this got developed some pretty complex doctrines, okay? For example, we're not going to read these, but there's several in Paul. Romans chapter 1, verse 7, his letter to the Corinthians, the first letter, verse 2, he would say, when he was writing a letter, he would address it to all the saints in that church. What else? 2 Corinthians, there's a reference. Philippians, Colossians, there's a ton of them, okay? So, plural. A plural, but a specific group of the marked out ones, all right? Saints, in my view, equals believers. Saints is a way to talk about the believers in a specific place. Does that make sense? The believers. If you read the book of Hebrews and also the little tiny letter of Jude, all over the place, there's a lot of it. They were the believers in that specific place. It's not a special class of believers, which is what it is today in a lot of traditions. We'll talk about that. It's not a special class. It's everybody who were believers in that particular place. All right, I think I've pounded that enough. Okay. So what happened? What happened between then, say the first 100 years of the church, or even the first 150, 200 years, what happened between that, when believers in a church were called saints, to this more complex system of sainthood and saints? What happened? Okay, so here's what I've got. No one knows for sure, but maybe in the 300s, about the time they were developing the Nicene Creed, the bishops were reading, they started to mark out the apostles, the early church fathers, as being special. They were not only believers, but they were special. Why? Because of the office they held, the influence they had on the young church, right? And so they started to refer to some of those individuals as saints. The apostles. At some point, Jesus' mother started to become Saint Mary. But before that, everybody was a saint, okay? But they started saying, well, they are, but there's some real special people, and we want to give them a title. We want to know just how special they were to the church, okay? That was in the 300s, the 4th century. And not all over the place, but in some parts of the Christian church, in the Western church. And then what happened was, in that same century, certain churches started to set aside one day of the year where they would remember these, not everybody, but those special ones. The apostles, the early church fathers, Mary, and James, the brother of Jesus. They set aside one day. It was like a day of celebration. It was a feast day. Like the potluck day, okay? But they would remember that they'd worship and they would remember them. And that started happening. But also, some of the great martyrs that were known in those days, like the apostles, I think all but one of them was martyred. And so it was a day to remember what they contributed to the growth of the church. Because by that time, the 300s, remember, the church is starting to boom. And at some point it becomes acknowledged by the Roman Empire. So they want to remember all those people who made it happen, and some of whom gave their lives for it, okay? So that started to happen. Now, here comes some of the weird stuff. So, up in Ireland, northern Scotland, Ireland, and some of those islands out there, remember that those Christians there, if you remember like 10 years ago when I did this Celtic Christianity, remember, were any of you around? Maybe I'll do it again this spring. It's a good, we can do a repeat. But up there, they were cut off. The Celtic Christians were cut off from all that yucky Augustinian Christianity I talked about last Sunday, the original sin and all that kind of stuff. They didn't know anything about any of that. Why? Because they were way up there, far removed from all the stuff going on with the apostles and the church fathers and all that. They were just doing their thing up in Celtic Ireland. And as you know, they had their own traditions, pre-Christian traditions, okay? One of which was sort of like a Day of the Dead. And the Day of the Dead, that's what the Mexican people call it, but they had like their own Day of the Dead. It was pronounced Samhain or Samhain, or Terry, you know, you're a good Irish guy. So they had that. So guess what they had to do? Like many of those secular holidays from these different countries and nationalities, and this is especially true like in Central and South America, when Christianity started to emerge, they kind of had to clean it up. But it was so special and dear to the people, they couldn't just let it go. So they put a Christian spin on it. And that we know for sure that then they started having what they would call All Souls Day, where they would remember the dead as Christians, okay? So that was one place where it was definitely happening. We also know for sure, this is for sure, that Pope Gregory IV, who was the Pope in the early 800s, that he set aside a day, a universal day in the Western Church. In the Western Church, because remember, when did the Greek Orthodox split off? It was in the 800s, wasn't it?
No, 1053.
So they had another couple hundred years.
Yeah.
But in the Western Church, he said, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to pick one day. And I'm going to set some rules on this thing, okay? So in 835, Pope Gregory says, okay, we're going to do this. And what is the day? Anybody know the day, the actual day of All Saints' Day? November 1st. November 1st. which means this year it was on yesterday. Okay. That was the day, and they would remember all of the saints. But here's the kicker. By that time, saints were the special ones. Now, you also probably know that in some parts of the church, leading up to that, a particular saint had a special day, right? But not all of them, because there's only 365 days in the year, and the last count is there's 2,600 canonized saints. Even back then, the Pope said, we got too many, so we're just going to have one day, and we're going to get it all done on one day, and it's going to be November 1st. Now you say, why, Jim? Why November 1st? So we need to back up to Halloween. Okay, so this is what we think. So Halloween, where did that come from? Those traditions. Scots-Irish, of course. Again, that holiday called, how do you say it, Terry? Samhain? Samhain, that's probably right. Samhain. So they're sort of the weird Day of the Dead thing. He goes, we need to clean this up. So November 1st is going to be All Saints' Day. And you guys can do your thing on October 31st. And they were told to clean that up too. In some parts of the world it wasn't allowed. Did you know it wasn't allowed in this country for a while? Guess what they carved? They didn't carve pumpkins. This is pretty funny. What did the Irish, what did they carve? Turnips. Turnips. Why? Because they didn't have pumpkins up there.
And they didn't want to eat them, so they just...
Yeah.
They wanted to eat the
Who likes
turnips.
turnips? They're good in a stew or something. That's about it. But yeah, they carved turnips and stuff. This was all these old heathen secular traditions that they had to kind of Christianize. So the Pope said, by this time, he had sent missionaries to Celtic Ireland by this time, because you know why? They're a little too renegade. So he sent another Augustine, not the one that we learned about last Sunday, but another guy named Augustine, sent him to Ireland and said, you need to straighten them out. They need to learn about original sin and baptism, and you need to get rid of some of those Irish things, because there's too much syncretism going on. Okay, so that we think that's why Pope Gregory the IV chose November 1st. Okay? Now, moving right along, are you all with me?
Yeah.
Amen. Okay. So, in the Western Church, which is the Roman Church, it started to develop criteria to become one of the special people. Okay? So here's and they developed a process for someone to become a saint. Okay? They didn't let go of the idea, the biblical idea that if you're a follower of Jesus, you're baptized, then you're kind of in the mix. But to become one of the special ones, where you get ST in front of your name, here's some of the criteria. The person had to be an exemplary model of piety and prayer, holiness. They could be a teacher or a doctor of the church, but they taught like Jesus. They also require wonder-working and miracles. I think they have to have two. Yeah, they have to have two verified miracles to their name. Whether they did it themselves or where somebody was praying to them. Okay, whether they did it in this world or in the next. So they have to have two of those. They're also considered, and this is the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism, which I'm going to go into in a second. They were people of intercession in this world, but they're also intercessors in above. And the idea is if they're interceding above, then you can ask them to pray for you. That's what veneration means, by the way. And then what else here, if I can read my writing? Oh, in this earthly life, most of them disavowed wealth and comfort and affluence. Most of them, like think of St. Francis. who was very poor. He disavowed, because he came from a wealthy family, he disavowed it all and chose a pathway of Jesus, which is, few clothes and hunger, walking with the poor. And then also a seer. They have to have revelatory abilities. They have to have at least one revelation or something like that. Okay. So those were some of the criteria that were developed. Now, in the end, guess the only person who declares that someone is a saint is who? The Pope. They're recommended by councils of bishops, but in the end, it takes years, and they have to be fully vetted by the council and then sort of proven to the Pope. That's the process in the Roman Church. Now, in the Eastern Church, the Eastern Orthodox churches, they're more like Protestants, believe it or not. They do talk about saints. You'll see saints all over the place, saints on the ceiling. But they regard all baptized believers as saints. And it's not a matter of becoming one. They talk about the divinization of the soul. Because why? They don't believe in original sin. They were part of the group that never bought Augustine's argument about original sin and baptism restores the image of God and all that sort of stuff. They never bought that. They talk about life, and this is kind of true for Protestants. We're more like them some way theologically than we know. They talked about a life of faith as becoming more like Christ. They talk about the divinization of the soul. It's becoming more and more and more godly and divine as you age and as you grow and your faith deepens. It's not the same thing as the Catholics in the canonization process. So they have saints, they recognize saints, but they don't have a process where you check off the box. Make sense? Anybody ever read The Lives of the Saints, written by a Butler? Anybody read that book? Do you know that when it was written, it was 1756? And at that time, there were, in the original version of Butler's Lives of the Saints, there were 1,486 recognized saints. So that would be about what? 4 a day. Okay. Again, that's why they just did put all the saints. Some saints have special days, but others you get recognized on the one day. By the most recent revision of Butler's Lives of the Saints, there are, not quite doubled, there are 2,565. And again, the ones in there have been canonized by the Roman Catholic Church and approved by the saint, or the Pope. Okay? So there's been more and more of them. The important thing was, they say, the church doesn't create saints. The church doesn't create them. Sometimes I say, well, the Pope made him a saint. Well, that's not really what they believe. It's just the church and the Pope recognize that that's who they are. They're not made into saints. They're acknowledged, they're recognized. Okay. We talked about the Eastern Church, and they just say anyone in heaven is a saint. Anyone who gets to heaven and has fellowship and communion with God is a saint. And that's where the idea of communion of saints comes from. They're all there. It's a communion. It's a group of people. Communion of saints. The Eastern Orthodox will also say you must never worship anybody but God. So they don't worship saints. And technically Catholics don't either. They venerate saints. By veneration, that means you call upon them and ask them to pray on your behalf or on behalf of a sick person or whatever. Okay, not quite the same thing that we say is worship. Now, for us Protestants, it's hard to kind of know the difference, but they get it. You're not worshiping them. You're just simply calling upon them for help. Yeah, intercessors. Now, let's talk about the Protestant Reformation. So, zoom ahead, and you're in the 1500s, and there's all these scholars who are starting to say, I don't like a lot of this stuff, this needs to change. So what did the Protestants do with this saints and this whole process of sainthood? Well, here's the thing. The Lutherans were more comfortable with it than the Calvinists. So here's the thing. The Lutherans, and to a great degree the Anglicans in England, they too believe that all believers are saints. That's a very biblical concept. But again, they said, but some historic figures are really, really special, and they get the title saint. We recognize them as saints, and that they have feast days in the Lutheran Church, in the Anglican Church. Now, for us, we go, what is that? We don't even know what that is. But there's certain days where their lives and their good works are remembered. Not as much in the Lutheran Church today, but they do it. And if you notice, most Lutheran churches are either named after a saint or a doctrine, which is true for the Episcopal Church. You don't have First Episcopal Church. You have St. Matthew's or Grace or St. Thomas Lutheran or Redemption Lutheran. And we dumb Presbyterians just have first and second and third and fourth and all that kind of stuff. Although there are a few Presbyterian churches that are named after, like, especially if they have Irish or Scottish background, St. Andrews, but they're very few. Very few. Yeah, John.
I worked for a summer when they had the Highlands, the summer camp, and I remember the first time, and they on the schedule, St. Anthony is coming, the kids from St. Anthony is coming next week. And you're like, we got Catholic kids coming?
Yeah.
And that was the first time I ever heard of
a
Presbyterian church named after a saint.
We had two churches in our Presbyterian. One was St. Andrews,
Yeah, that was it.
which is the patron saint of Scotland, I believe.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Scotland. Yeah, Scotland. Where Presbyterian Church came from. Okay, think about St. Giles Cathedral. Why do we call it St. Giles? Because that's what it was before we became Protestant and Reformed. It's still called a cathedral, even though Presbyterians do not have bishops or cathedrals. We just didn't mess with it. But all that comes from the past. Does that make sense? So the Lutherans still have some of that. They're very comfortable talking about saints, where we aren't. You just rarely hear it in this church anyway. You don't talk about St. Mark or St. John. You talk about Mark's Gospel, right? Linda?
Isn't it St. Stanislaw, the big, beautiful church?
Which is the patron saint of Poland?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that whole area.
No, not the Polish, the Slovaks.
The Slovaks, okay.
Yeah.
I know it's a really important person in the life of a particular group. So it's Slovak, okay. There aren't a lot of Protestants in Poland. It's mostly Catholic, but some of these countries, it's sort of the patron saint of their country. Yeah. Okay, so moving right along, we're almost done. Promise. So in the Reformed Church, remember Luther came first, and Luther retained a lot of the stuff of the Catholic Church. Luther did not clean house the way Calvin did.
Has it recently, or have some Lutheran churches become less tied to that?
Yeah, there are some. It depends on the denomination of Lutheranism and stuff, but yeah. But Luther wanted to retain as much of the old Roman Catholic Church as was possible, but changing the meaning and the doctrines behind it. And so saints was one of those things, is like, I'm not going to mess with that. I'll remodel the kitchen, but I'm not going to put in new cabinets, right? Okay. So in the Reformed Church, Calvin came maybe 50 years later, and Calvin was like, love you, Martin, but you didn't go far enough. And Luther would have nothing to do with any of it. As is true with most of the other Protestant churches. Calvin was a Bible guy, and he said, it means this in the Bible, and that's what it is, and no one has special status. No one has special status. Because everybody has sinned and fallen short of the glory. He was very biblical about that. So you did not have saints' days. You were absolutely forbidden to venerate a saint or to ask a saint to pray for you. That was utterly not allowed in Calvin's churches, whether in Switzerland or Hungary or any of those places. You weren't allowed to do that. You did not have special days or titles. They are not to be venerated. Okay, what about the other churches that came later? The Baptists and other churches. Well, sometimes you'll hear them speak of apostles as saints. Sometimes, like they'll talk about St. Mark or St. John or whatever. But they same thing. They would say all believers are saints. In God, we're all the same. So no one gets a title. You can call them apostles because they fulfilled a specific office, but they're not exalted. Same thing. So they sort of followed the Reformed idea of it. But yeah, we didn't talk about it. Okay. So again, Pope Gregory was the one who said it's going to be on November 1st. This is for the Roman Church. It's going to be on November 1st. And what they tried to do was clean up the day before, the day they started calling All Hallows Eve. So Hallows All Saints Eve. It was the day before, but they wanted people to not make it so dark and macabre. So like in America, before the Scots-Irish immigration of like the 1800s, you did not have the yucky part of Halloween. It was a religious event. The Scots-Irish, they brought the carvings, and when they got here, there were pumpkins. They started carving pumpkins and ghosts and making it was a macabre thing. But it all comes from that old Celtic holiday, Samhain, right? Terry, Samhain? I think that's right. I actually took Irish like 25 years ago, but I don't remember anything.
How do you spell that?
It's actually spelled Sanhihain, I think, but it's pronounced Samhain. Samhain. Yeah. But that's where it all comes from. And they brought it back, because it wasn't allowed in this country before then. And when they all came, it was like, well, the cat's out of the bag, you can't do anything about it. And then it got, in my opinion, worse and worse and worse, to the point today where it's really out of control, in my opinion. It's funny, Christians who come from other countries, especially the African countries, are absolutely appalled at what happens here.
For the kids.
I know.
Because when we were kids, you would dress maybe as a hobo.
Yeah. It wasn't that scary.
It wasn't that scary.
And all we had was a pumpkin on the porch. That was it.
It's typical.
And it had a happy face.
It's like a lot of stuff. It's like
It's pretty scary, yeah. It's pretty scary
have
stuff,
rights
yeah.
for the kids,
Yeah.
and to the point where it's like, it's like September, and people are already putting up Halloween.
Oh, it's like Christmas. It's the biggest Christmas. Although I noticed this year, though, it seemed it wasn't as much as it has been. Yeah, I don't know if we're past that fad, or maybe it's just a Cleveland thing. Because where I come from, we don't do this stuff.
It might be
David. Okay, listen, everybody. David's got something important to say.
In Nigerian situation, they believe that when you celebrate Halloween,
Yeah.
you are celebrating with the devil.
Yeah, the devils, yeah.
You are honoring the devils.
Yes.
You are doing everything that is opposite of Christianity.
Right, yeah, I know. And it's like they don't do this stuff. They do. It's not allowed. And it wasn't allowed here until the Scots-Irish came, brought some of their... Now, they had cleaned it up, but the same thing, the ghosts, the goblins, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, yes.
I worked with someone who went to a Catholic school, and the kids could dress up for Halloween if they dressed up like a saint.
Okay, all right. So here's something else. What we normally call All Saints Sunday, now it fell on a Sunday this year. What we normally call All Saints Sunday is wrong. It's actually All Souls Sunday. So in other words, there's Halloween the night before, there's November 1st, which is when you celebrate All Saints. But so that we recognize all of the saints, the Sunday following November 1st which actually would be next Sunday, becomes All Souls Sunday. And so what we actually celebrate here is not All Saints Day in the truest sense of the word. What we celebrate is All Souls Sunday. But you know, who knows the difference? Just so you know.
But as a
John.
kid, guy who grew up in the Presbyterian church, I didn't do that until I came here.
Right, it's big here.
We would not,
Yeah.
my grandparents would be, my grandparents had no problem with me trick-or-treating or
Yeah.
anything, but talking about saints,
Yeah.
they would be more
Yeah.
upset that we were talking about saints
Yeah.
than me going out trick-or-treating.
But here's the thing though, John, when you come into this church, it is absolutely clear, when we talk about saints, we're talking about everybody.
Do you think
Everybody.
that's because I grew up in
An ethnic church?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
The southern wing, you guys were doing something
Yeah.
different than us northerners.
The ethnicity that was here was Scots-Irish. It's Scots-Irish, mostly. But yeah, technically what we celebrate is All Souls Sunday, which is what they do at the Anglican cathedrals. Although today I noticed they're celebrating All Souls Sunday because November 2nd, which should be All Souls Day, or no, it fell on a Sunday, which it does every 7 years. But yeah, so just so you know that.
I remember seeing a young kid we used to call.
Hey, wait a second, wait a
Oh,
second.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Linda, then we'll get you. Go ahead, Linda. No, go ahead.
What's the difference between All Saints and All Souls?
All saints are for the special ones. In the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, all saints are for those special ones. All souls are for like you and me, when we go belly
What
up.
did we celebrate today?
Technically speaking, all souls. Technically speaking. But we're not technical, and we're not Catholic or Anglican, so I don't care. We'll call it All Saints. That's what you called it before I ever got here. Did you have this? Okay. Anybody else have anything you want to add? Oh, Lynn, or Larry.
When we were younger, we used to call it a beggar's night.
Beggar's Night, yeah.
Yeah, right. We call it beggars.
Yeah, we had beggar's night. We go out there and beg for candy.
Oh, speaking of that, I have one more factoid for you. Okay, so where does that come from? Trick-or-treating. They think it can be traced back to Samhain when they made cakes, little tiny cakes. And that was the way you celebrated, was the cakes, and you had to go ask for them. Little tiny cakes. Is that true in your experience, Lauren?
Growing up in a Scotch household, my parents would tell me that back in Scotland, you didn't just walk up and get candy.
Yeah.
You walked up and you were invited into the home.
Yeah.
And there you would put on a play or a skit or sing
You had to earn it.
and sing for your supper.
Yeah.
And you would entertain and then you would be given a treat.
Yeah. So you asked for these little cakes. Susan?
I have a friend who's Bolivian, and they do more like the Day of the Dead, like
Yeah,
the Mexican things. And they actually, in Bolivia, I guess, go to the cemetery with food.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. They have picnics on the graves.
Yes, they take
Yeah.
food to the cemetery,
Yeah.
so there's not like beggars night.
Southern Hemisphere, yeah. It's
Yeah.
like the Day of the Dead is very important. And you go to the cemetery, you have a party, you picnic in the cemetery. I saw Jane.
I'm 88, and when we used to go Halloweening, the people would invite you into their house, and they would want to know who or what you were representing, and then they would give you. And then sometimes when the people wouldn't answer the door, we lived on 25th Street in Canton. We had this big county farm across the street from us, and they had corn. And so we would go across the street and get the ears of corn, and we would get all the corn off the cob and have them in a little bag. And if we went to someone's house and they wouldn't answer the door, then we would throw corn up to their...
Jane, you naughty girl. Naughty
Good thing
girl.
that's not being recorded.
Nowadays they come up to the door and they just have a bag out.
Yeah.
And so I always would, this year's the first year I didn't do it, but I would always say, no, who are you supposed to be? And then they'd be so excited that someone...
Yeah, a lot of them don't even say trick or treat. I mean, they just...
And so my neighbor said it this year because I'm getting too old.
And that comes back to, You have to do something to get your little cake. So it all goes back, that's where it comes from. Yeah. Jay.
I was wondering, does the Christian church officially see Day of the Dead as an equal or equally important holiday, or is it viewed differently?
I think it's different, James. I would say in the Southern Hemisphere among the Catholics, it's a very important day. We don't really have that here, as far as I know. The closest thing is creepy Halloween night. But in the Southern Hemisphere, it's a religious thing. I mean, you go to the cemetery, they light candles, they have picnics on the graves, and it's a celebration of their loved ones.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. But it's a part of their faith, and I'm guessing most of them are Roman Catholics. I'm guessing, I don't know.
Well, our son is married to a woman from Mexico, and they really like the Day of the Dead and venerate that. And this year, he asked us for some specific little things about our parents that he wanted to put in a comic book form. His kids are 5 and 7, for them to talk about and read and have that to learn about the people that they've never met.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, Cindy. We protect our young people from death. You know, whereas people who went before us, thought nothing about going to the graveyard, and today a lot of people won't even do it. We're so afraid of death. We're so death denying, and we do it to our kids. I personally think we harm children when we try to protect them until they get to be 18 or 19 years old and one of their friends dies. Death is a part of life. And I personally think going to the cemetery, like on Decoration Day or whatever, you don't see a lot of that anymore. When I grew up, it was important. It was really important. But, we had animals dying all around us. And when Grandma died, we went to the funeral home and we saw the body. So that death wasn't, I'm not saying it wasn't a scary thing, but it's nothing like a young person who's been protected and insulated from it. It's not healthy, in my opinion. It's just completely not healthy. In my sermon, those people mean something to us, and their legacies last, and you honor them. Yeah.
They would be really shocked about the coffin pictures that started to become popular after the Civil War, that
all my kinfolk, they would take pictures of people dead in their caskets.
Yeah.
It was like
That was Italian funeral.
Yeah.
All of our old Italian families, they would take pictures, especially if you had the Sicilian families. It was to prove they had died.
They're dead. I saw a hand. Yes, Kathleen.
I went to the parade yesterday, Day of the Dead.
Oh, yeah.
In Gordon Square. It was wonderful.
Really? They had a parade? I didn't know
But
that.
I kept wondering what the ethnicity is. It was more Mexican.
Yeah, it's Southern, yeah. Central Southern America.
It was so joyful.
Yeah, it's not a macabre day. They're celebrating their ancestors. They're the people that they loved and lost. Okay, one more, Jim, then we're going to go.
There's one other thing on the Day of the Dead. There's, I think, an excellent movie talking about it called Coco.
Yeah.
Animated film, and it really got
really?
heart and passion.
Coco. Is it a Disney film?
Yeah.
I think it is.
And it's about the Day of the Dead,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you have to go all dark and creepy about it. It's just, I don't know. I like to go to the cemetery and look at the graves and give thanks. It doesn't bother me a bit. Okay, enough for now. Okay, good? Okay, we'll see you when we see you. Everybody go vote Tuesday.